Hi, everybody. This is Margie Meacham of Learningtogo.info, and this is another edition of the Brain Matters podcast. Today, I'm really excited to have Dr. Barbara Oakley of Oakland University with us. Yes, Dr. Oakley of Oakland University. So that name will not be easy to forget. I am privileged to be taking her Learning How to Learn MOOC right now on Coursera, and I just had to share her with all of you. So, Dr. Oakley, welcome. And can you start by telling us what you mean by learning how to learn?
Well, it's interesting to me that uh, we often take from 12 to 16 years of our lives in educational institutions. But the surprise to me is that often we never get a course on how to learn. We just get stuff that we have to learn. So it's kind of like that old saying of teach a person to fish, and they'll be taken care of for a lifetime. But just give them a fish, and they're not really uh, going to be able to go very far. So I think that's kind of what we do with our learning in educational system. We give a lot of fish, but we don't say this is how you fish, and that's what learning how to learn does. It teaches you how to fish intellectually.
And I've noticed, and of course, my specialty is applying neuroscience to enhance learning. And I've noticed that learning how to learn also does that, that you're relating back to what we're discovering about how the brain works.
That's exactly right. I think for me, my own story is that I essentially flunked my way through elementary, middle, and high school math and science. And it's kind of an embarrassment to admit it now because I my day job is I'm a professor of engineering. And one day, one of my students asked me, you know, how'd you change your brain? And I thought about it, and a lot of my writing and even my research has related to neuroscience. And I thought, why don't I go take a look and see what neuroscience has to tell us about how we can learn more effectively? It has a lot, as you know, to tell us about how we learn effectively. And so that's what the Learning How to Learn MOOC is about, and my book as well, A Mind for Numbers.
Well, we'll make sure that we provide a link to how everyone can get that book because it sounds fascinating. And I was similar to you. I really struggled in my early grades and just kind of had to teach myself how to learn because at the time that wasn't really offered to the general student population. You had to be in some kind of a special classification, they used to call it. You had to be in special ed to be taught these strategies. And of course, now we realize everybody needs them.
Right. And but more than that, I think there's a lot coming out haven't known before about how people learn effectively. And I think part of the challenge too has been that many of the great researchers, educators we've had, and psychologists who have tried to help enhance our ways of learning. A challenge is that some of the hardest things for people to learn are math and science. And yet, the educational practitioners who are teaching about learning are often not professionals themselves in the STEM, science, technology, engineering, and math disciplines. So this means they're teaching about how to learn, but they actually don't know the insides of how you learn the toughest things to learn. And so I think learning how to learn and a mind for numbers both kind of take you from an insider's perspective into how do you really grasp the toughest subjects and do it in a way that's very similar to how people learn dance or music or language or any of these kinds of disciplines because there's great similarities there.
Yeah, that is one of the big ahas. I think you're absolutely right because certainly there was a time as I was my first profession, I was studying to be a teacher in college, and um, because my major was English, there was really no discussion about my math and my science after high school, I didn't continue with those other than my own personal interest in it, because it wasn't considered necessary for what I was going to do. And what we're understanding now is the convergence of all of these sciences that if you really want to understand the brain, you have to be comfortable with math and science to do that.
That's right. And another thing, though, is I think math and science practitioners can really greatly benefit from those with an expertise in English, in metaphor, who really understand how word becomes thought, becomes something that helps enhance your understanding of a variety of things. So I'm so glad to see that. I think there truly is starting to be a convergence. It's not so much that uh, English and the humanities and social science need science as science actually needs English and the humanities and the social sciences.
I was privileged to see Dr. Neil deGrasse Tyson speak last year at the Learning Solutions Convention. And he said a similar thing. He felt very privileged that he started his studies in Cornell, where he was required to take a broad range of courses, and that opened his mind and made him a better scientist. And he actually has done research on it and has figures of Nobel laureates and where they went to school. And the schools like Cornell that have a more um, uh, Renaissance kind of approach to developing a scientist are far more represented as the people who are really making the major discoveries, because it takes a leap across several disciplines usually to have that kind of a moment.
It certainly can. I think we have to be careful though, because sometimes we're very confident in that math and science people have to generalize and learn, humanities and take these general education kind of courses. And I think it's great that we do that. But we don't sort of have a flip side of the coin. People can go through a university system fairly easily without taking any solid math or science courses whatsoever. They can take math as understood through poetry, and actually that does a disservice to us as a nation, because we have people who don't really understand how to think um, in a good scientific manner about important factors in today's society.
That is so true, and it's a big concern of mine. Another podcast that we did here was with Dr. Jeanette Winters, and she's a real advocate of closing the STEM gap, getting more women in STEM, and also just everyone becoming just basically literate in science, technology, math, engineering. Far more than what we're doing, because we really, and I don't know, I couldn't say off the top of my head, but I know that the United States has an embarrassing rank compared to the rest of the world in those subjects.
We do. And I think part of that is because we're a wealthy nation where we often say to our children and our students, follow your passion. And I think that's actually what gets us in trouble, because what happens is passions develop about what you're good at. And some things are a lot easier to get good at. And so when we say follow your passion, we're kind of saying follow just what comes easy to you. And I always say, don't just follow your passion, broaden your passion, and your life will be greatly enriched.
That's a great saying, Doctor. Thank you for that. Now, I want to talk a little bit too about your experience with the MOOC platform. And for anybody who doesn't know, that's massive open online course. And they've been all the rage, both in the education space and in corporate learning. And my practice is pretty much 50-50. I consult in both worlds, which is really neat for me. There's at the beginning, there was all this excitement, and then it kind of sputtered for a little while. And now it seems to be getting momentum again as people are understanding how to craft that kind of course and how to set expectations and what kinds of people come to those kind of courses. So I find your course very compelling and very well designed. And I just wonder if you could share a couple of things that you've learned from this experience.
Oh my, I've learned so much. It's just amazing. Um, for one thing, I have learned that it is possible to go in your basement knowing absolutely nothing about film editing or anything of that nature and make a world-class course watched by over 1 million people. And you can do it for less than $5,000. It's just like, whoa, I had no idea. Last summer, we were sitting in the basement doing this filming and thinking, is anybody ever going to watch this? And the reaction has been extraordinary. But I think for instructional designers, I certainly have my hats off to them. They play a key role in conveying information in a way that captures people's attention. A big thing that I learned out of this is careful scripting is very important. Some instructional designers will say things like, "Well, just have some keywords there or a little phrase to remind you and speak extemporaneously." And for some people, that can work. But actually, oftentimes people are umming and awing and a little nervous in front of the camera. It's a lot better to have something that's scripted as long as you're a natural in being able to read a script. But motion in videos is super important. Our attentional mechanisms are activated by looming motion, moving motion. A talking head does not count as motion. And then if you use green screen, you can actually incorporate your instructor into the PowerPoint or the visuals that instructor is talking about. This reduces the cognitive load on the viewer because you don't have to assimilate two separate things going on. You don't have a picture in picture in the corner and a big picture that they're talking about. Instead, the instructor's right there in the picture pointing to the neuron or whatever is actually going on. And it makes it much easier for listeners. And the last big thing is people learn through metaphor. Models themselves, mathematical models, are simply metaphors. They break down. Everything breaks down at some point. But learning takes place much more rapidly, particularly in the difficult math and science arenas, if you use plenty of metaphors and analogies to help bring people on board rapidly. So videos that's part and parcel of what videos can do. So there's so many pluses to online courses and the economies of scale that they can bring, particularly when you consider how time consuming it can be to edit a seemingly simple 5-minute video.
That's a very good point. And thank you so much for your comment about talking heads. I have this issue sometimes with my clients where they say, well, it is interactive. They're watching me. And that is not the same. And there are some authoring tools that actually force you into that talking head off to the side. The script is rolling, uh, and then there's an image. That is way too much going on. And as you mentioned, the cognitive load is significant. So we're always looking for ways to reduce the cognitive load. That doesn't mean that you reduce the interaction, quite the opposite, but you have to have it all work together. So you really, I may just take that little snippet and play it to all of my customers because you really summarized what I find myself explaining all the time. So thank you very much for that.
You're very welcome. A last little point is gesticulation. Don't cut the head off. If you're doing a talking head, include the hands. because
Yes.
people learn through their mirror neurons actually reacting by watching your hands. So it helps them understand more easily if they can see your hands.
That's an excellent point. That's very true. Now, let's talk about mirror neurons for a bit because there has been a lot of coverage about the discovery about mirror neurons and how they work, but I'm not sure that all of our listeners will immediately recognize that term. Could you fill us in?
Mirror neurons are neurons that, when you are watching another person making a motion, for example, reaching out to grab a grape, this was first observed in monkeys actually, your the same neurons fire within your brain that are firing within the brain of the person who is making that motion. So, of course, everybody went, bananas over this when this discovery was first made. And so all sorts of things were attributed to mirror neurons, and it's kind of overplayed, really. But it does seem that mirror neurons that kind of echo in another person's mind the kind of neuronal activities that are taking place in your mind um, do seem to help us um, understand what others are doing and wanting to do.
Thank you for that. And there's a great study. It's been around a long time, and before we knew what was happening inside the brain, and this was with basketball players. You might be familiar with it. So we didn't have the term mirror neurons, but what they did is they took two groups of players, and the goal was to improve their percentage of free throw shots, so they could make those more often. And one group practiced every day, and the other group watched the practice, and both groups improved. And so that's a concrete example of what you were just talking about.
Yes, precisely.
So, another thing that I'm interested in, Doctor, is, and you touched on it earlier about how you struggled at the beginning with math and science, but at some point you must have decided that you wanted a career in these fields. So, how did that journey begin? And how did you end up doing what you do today? There must have been, some kind of interesting steps or events that turned you around.
Well, I I grew up in a resolutely monolingual household, and you can guess what language we spoke. But I always wanted to learn another language. It seemed really like an exciting thing to do, to be able to think in a different language. So I didn't have the money to go to college. But there was a way I could learn a language and have someone else pay for it. And that was to join the army. So I did. I joined the army right out of high school, and I did learn a language. I learned Russian, and I ended up working out on Soviet trawlers as a Russian translator up on the Bering Sea. And
Wow.
I just loved having adventures and seeing the world through new perspectives. So I also ended up at the South Pole Station in Antarctica. And that's where I met my husband. So I always say I had to go to the end of the earth to meet that man. But the thing is, I began to realize that my seeking of new perspectives was always sort of constricted. I mean, it was like new perspectives, but only the things that I feel like I'm really interested in. It wasn't truly being open to new perspectives. And more than that, with a degree in Slavic languages and literature, which is what I ended up getting there are just not a lot of job opportunities popping out with that. So I knew if I wanted to leave the military after my commitment was finished, which I decided to do, that uh, that would be a great opportunity for me if I wanted to try to broaden my perspectives. So at age 26, when I got out of the army, I started with remedial math, and I was like totally shocked. It was really, really hard at first. And if I'd known then what I know now, I could have made it a lot easier. But I kept persevering, and slowly got better and better. And then I started finding, I really like this. Actually, I'm not bad at it. It just took a lot of, really, what happened was I began to understand that the way I learned Russian was very similar to how I should be learning the language of math and science. And so when I began realizing that and applying that, it started to make things much easier.
Well, that is such an inspiring story. And one of the things I love about it is it's never too late. Some people at 26 might have thought, it's too late for me to switch careers and get the education I need to pursue it. And, it's not, it's never too late. And I hope somebody out there who's listening to this might be thinking, I'd like to go back to school, but, and I hope that changes their minds.
I hope so too. And I should make a comment about the number of 40 and even 50-year-olds that I get in my engineering classroom, people who are retooling at an older age. And what people often don't realize is it's that you've gotten the training recently. That's what they're looking for. They don't care if you're older. In fact, often being a little older is a benefit because they know you've got the wisdom of years. And it's just, have you gotten that training recently? And that's what really matters for job hunting.
Well, yeah, great. I know a lot of folks right now are still thinking about jobs and careers and education. So, perfect timing for them to hear that from you. So, you've got this wildly successful MOOC going on right now. You've published your book, A Mind for Numbers. You're a sought after speaker, which is how I first became aware of you. And you're teaching engineering at Oakland University on top of all that. So, what's next for you? What are you working on right now that's really got you excited?
Oh, I'm working on a new book. It'll be coming out in another year and a half or so. From Random House. It's called Mind Shift: How Ordinary and Extraordinary People Have Changed Their Lives Through Learning, and you can too. And it's an inspirational book with good, solid neuroscience to help people understand how to shift their mindset and how possible it is.
Well, we'll have to have you back as you get closer to that. Um, that's actually a perfect subject for our Brain Matters conferences. We're doing our first one in November, and it's all about how do you get your brain to perform at maximum or close to maximum performance level. And so we call it bringing out your inner genius. And what you've described with Mind Shift is exactly that. So that's very exciting. I definitely want to follow up with that with you, and we'll have you back at a time that's appropriate.
Well, thank you so much, Margie. It's just been great talking with you, and I'm inspired by your own story and your work.
Well, thank you. So, everybody, I hope you've had as good a time as I have talking with Dr. Barbara Oakley. And you can follow her. You can get her book. You can sign up for her MOOC. And we will have all that information ready for you on our website. Thanks so much.